So now I'm ready to invite another big attraction of the day. We are pleased to invite Mr. Alvaro Yepes, who is coming with his presentation on contamination control, which is a big focus of the day today. Irrespective of the dosage form you are manufacturing, this is a major area of interest from across the industry. To say few words about Mr. Alvaro. Alvaro is a chemical engineer, MSc in Industrial Business Management, 2 years of experience in pharmaceutical engineering projects, including HVAC, WFI, PA systems, etc. Process vessels layout, design, and GMP compliance. He has 16 years of experience in clean room control with emphasis in critical cleaning, disinfection, and gowning. His experience also includes visiting and collaboration with more than 60 pharmaceutical plants in 4 continents. He is specialized in change management and implementation. Since 2002, he holds the commercial director position in Vestilab, CRC, and since 2015, also leading as a technical director. So welcome to you, Alvaro. It's all yours now.
Hello, good morning, or good afternoon for all of you. So welcome to this talk. I'll be explaining some background aspects on Annex 1 first. This is the content and structure of the presentation. So first of all, what is the global situation regarding the pharmaceutical industry? Also, what is the focus of the Annex 1, basically? Further, I will get into cleaning and disinfection, risk analysis, and the focus of the Annex 1 in these terms. Afterwards, we will be doing some video examples that we hope you can see clearly. It depends a lot on the internet connection, but hopefully you will be able to see the details. After that, we will get in 2 short or reduced case studies. The first one is the contamination control strategy. And finally, a reduced version of EMEA applied to particle contamination in vials. Okay, so what is the situation at the moment? Basically, there has been a lot of incidents involving drugs in the market in the past 10, 15 years. The first situation that WHO is stating is that the control systems in place in different countries are far away from where they used to be. For example, this statement says only 20% of the states have an adequate control system, and 30% of them have no regulation at all. So with this situation, what's basically happening? This map shows different situations that have been presented in the market involving substandard drugs in the past. This is just a summary. This presentation will be available to you. But of these cases that are highlighted here, probably the best known and the most commonly known is the outbreak of fungal meningitis due to a corticoid anti-inflammatory injectable. More than 726 patients affected, of which over 100 deaths. So this is a circumstance, as you can see, that is affecting all world, is affecting all markets, and that has triggered a lot of political debate and has triggered a lot of investigations on the political side on how we can guarantee better the safety of the patients. Another factor to bear in mind is that there has been a study that shows that 1/3 of the sterile industrial capacity is offline due to quality issues. So if you can imagine, these circumstances is totally shocking, and from the business point of view, unacceptable. You cannot afford as an industry to have 1/3 of your investment not producing. And second, from the patient safety, there's a lot of disadvantages, because when a plant is stopped by regulators, the availability of drugs in the market gets in shortage, and therefore it could be either an invitation for fake drugs to reach patients, putting the people's lives at risk, but also disrupting all the functioning of the health systems worldwide. So with this in mind, political actions favoring integration have led, for example, to the creation of the Pharmaceutical International Cooperation Scheme, PICS, of which quite a lot of markets worldwide are today part of, and a few more are in the pipeline to become members in the next few years. So even if the country we are in is not directly involved with PICS, it's very likely that the markets that products are exported to are in fact regulated by PICS. And also, it's important to understand that inspectors worldwide, even though their countries are not part of PICS, are attending training sessions from the PIC Academy, which at the end of the day wants to harmonize and have a common way to use risk assessment in the way they do the inspections. So at the end of the day, Annex 1, it's a consequence of the previous factors, and the idea is to move into guaranteeing the safety of patients in a better way. So these are the main trigger points. Bear in mind that the current version of Annex 1, the one that is legally binding today, has been applied for more than 12 years. And since then, there have been a lot of technological changes. Also, the poor implementation of the quality risk management in various aspects, from being too reactive to blaming far too many times to the human error the problems instead of revising the robustness of the process. And as said, the safety of patients. So we are now expecting that the new Annex 1 is issued next year in summer, after several public revisions. And what is interesting here, we can see, for example, these words, the number of times they were mentioned in the 2008 version, and the number of times it's mentioned in the drafts available today. So we can see strongly that risk analysis, for example, and risk management are coming as hot topics. So what is the key situation in terms of particle, in terms of microbial, and in terms of pathogen contamination? First of all, that we need to make sure we have a rationale for all the decisions we take in terms of particle and process contamination, but also microbial contamination. And we also need to be sure we are evaluating this risk holistically, which is for the very first time also including clearly what is the pathogen and endotoxin as a part of the risk analysis we need to take. The contamination control strategy comes as one of the strongest novelties of this Annex 1. And what is important here is that we need to have an holistic approach that takes into account the different aspects involving contamination control, and also the life cycle of those aspects through the plant life cycle and the product life cycle, and that we try to focus in having a corrective and preventive approach instead of reactive approach. So if you see the draft of the Annex 1, all of these areas are mentioned as to be taken into account for this contamination control strategy. And when we think of holistic analysis, it's, for example, saying, I do have gowning and personal hygiene protocol that has some gaps, and we are aware that there may be some gaps in there. So how does my air system impact that? Is it capable of handling the extra contamination load? Is my cleaning and disinfection schedule taking into account all the possible routes of contamination through personnel? What's happening with the materials and the packaging of the biocides or the wipers I'm introducing in the clean room? Is it making an extra load of contamination to my area? So this is the kind of analysis that these Annex 1s want you to be taken into account instead of doing isolation analysis of each factor. So in this situation, we can imagine that the life of all of you professionals in the industry is certainly not an easy one. For one side, there's the economic pressure to reduce costs due to the competition in the market, the arrival of more and more competitors for molecules that in the past were protected or that had higher margins. In the other side, there is the inspection level coming up and higher, and technology getting more complex. And all of that, you have to simmer it in your head and try to take the right decisions on a daily basis. So what we need to do is use the quality risk management as our navigation chart, in which basically 3 areas or 3 blocks are key: the risk assessment phase, the risk control phase, and the risk review, and keep an ongoing cycle through the lifetime of the installation, the product, the process itself. All has to be supported by a proper communication of the risk. And this is paramount. It's very important that through the different layers of organization, a good understanding of the risk, the identification, what are the impacts or possible impacts of a certain risk, what are the options we are evaluating for mitigation, and whether we need to accept a certain risk, how can we make sure we are having a proper monitoring system that keeps the patient safety at the highest level possible. All of these needs to be taken with a proactive approach. Reacting to problems is no longer acceptable, and that represents a strong challenge for all of us, for sure. This will be in the presentation, but this is a very good approach available on the web. Once I engage into trying to analyze different alternatives to mitigate or to reduce or eliminate risk, it's very sound to have a structured process into identifying, seeing what are the criteria that these risks need to be taken into account. How can we link the different critical factors or variables we can measure or evaluate to the benefits that different alternatives may offer? Also, we need to tie that into risk terms, but also into cost of solution terms. And with that information, we need to get the best option that guarantees the sustainability of our business from a financial point of view, but also the safety of the patients as an ongoing strategic value for any company. So in this presentation, we'll get deeper in cleaning and disinfection, but we will also mention some other factors in the case studies to keep in mind. So this slide shows directly from the draft what is critical here. So for the very first time, we see clearly stating that cleaning is an activity that needs to be performed prior and separated from what is the disinfection phase. In the industry, even people that are specialized in the biocide industry, we could confuse the terms cleaning and disinfection and use them sometimes instinctively. And we really need to get our attention to detail, because cleaning and disinfection are to be treated separate. They are performed in a different way from the point of view of the SOPs, and the objective of each one is completely different. Also, now it's highlighted that a sporicidal agent as a part of the rotation scheme is a mandatory, it's a should. And also that everything has to be completely written and rationalized to prove that we can remove contamination prior to disinfection and that we address residues from disinfection and not only from process. For example, the cleaning program needs to show that the residues, both from process and from the biocides, are not to be a barrier that can interfere with the actual biocide action. Also, technologies that are widely used in the industry, such as BHP, need to count on a clean area prior to applying the BHP. So it's no longer acceptable to rely only on the BHP sterilization without evaluating how clean the area is for the BHP to act. And everything needs to be properly evaluated and documented. So what is the difference? We use this example widely. What is the main difference between cleaning and disinfection? Disinfection, just as with the mouthwash, is applying a chemical to the surface and keep it there for as long time as possible so it penetrates the bacterial wall and destroys the microorganism. So that's equivalent to the mouthwash. On the other hand, cleaning is basically a mechanical action applied to disperse and dissolve contamination and dirt into water or another fluid. Most of the times it requires this mechanical action to be applied by a practical tool, but also there is a chemical action that in this example is the toothpaste that increases the chances that we remove the dirt. So just as we do on a daily basis, brushing or removing residues is critical for the disinfection phase to work properly. If we don't use it, the action of the mouthwash will not suffice for sure. So the inner circle is the theory behind this process of cleaning. And basically we have 4 parameters to play with to try to achieve a certain result. Of these parameters in the practical actions in a clean room, when we are discussing background operations or the filling area cleaning, there's very little room to play with temperature. We cannot change the temperature settings very much, and there is a limit in terms of safety of operator at which we can operate. Time is basically productivity and money, so we want to keep that as short as possible. So if we want to keep this area of the circle as small as possible, we need to play both with chemical and mechanical action. The chemical action comes with a detergent or anything that has a detersive action, capable of dispersing dirt or dissolving it. And finally, mechanical action is basically the tools and the operator's effort. One good example for the operators to keep in mind and everybody to keep in mind when we're trying to understand whether we're doing a cleaning or we're doing a disinfection phase. Imagine you're cleaning your car with a sponge and a bucket. You're doing your run with some soap, and then eventually somebody interrupts you and you go for a coffee or you get a phone call, and when you come back, all the dirt that you were removing dissolves again and deposits in the surface of the car. And the car is going to be looking even dirtier than before. So when we're cleaning, it's very critical not only to perform the mechanical action to remove the dirt from the surface, but to guarantee that we are taking it away and removing it before it dries out again. Keep that in mind as compared to a disinfection phase, that most likely is that you need to achieve a time that is longer than your validated in vitro and coupon contact time. And that means probably leave the biocides to dry in the surface. So in this slide, we show different types of microorganisms in terms of how easy or how difficult are they to kill, and the relationship to the different molecules we normally would be using in our contamination control cycle. So first of all, sanitizing agents like alcohol, it's a common mistake sometimes to believe that IPA or ethanol can destroy some sort of fungal spores or even different types of spores is not happening. So we use this only as a sanitizing agent. Then a broad spectrum disinfectant is the preferred molecule to be used on a daily basis. And then the use of the sporicidal agent need to be done on established base, but it's not favored at all to do it on a daily basis. This guideline is very clear already in the Annex 1 that we need to use a periodic use of the sporicidal. But for example, USP 1072 clearly states that the daily application of sporicidal agent is not recommended. Why? Because these are highly corrosive molecules that leave a lot of residues. Therefore, if you use them daily, you need to have a very thorough cleaning protocol afterwards. And also because the operators will be exposed to stronger chemicals, which makes obviously their application more difficult. And if operators are not comfortable, it's more difficult that they do a proper job of overlapping the strokes or doing the right mopping technique. So normally it's better to do a daily application of a broad spectrum disinfectant and only use periodically the sporicidal, maybe once per week or once every 2 weeks, to be established depending on the EM data. So as a summary, remember, cleaning is removing and disinfection is laying down the liquid for a long time to get a kill efficacy. Now we will move a little bit more into the detail of the risks that we want to evaluate in terms of mainly of the tools we use for wiping, either for cleaning purposes or for disinfection purposes. So this Ishikawa diagram shows some of the aspects that we may want to consider when we do our holistic approach. And just as an example, imagine you're using nitrogen peroxide sporicidal agent. We know that that molecule, 6% nitrogen peroxide, for example, for trigger sprays, has a mild sporicidal activity compared to bleach or compared to peracetic acid hydrogen peroxide mixtures or to hypochlorous acid. So the killing efficacy is lower than those other stronger sporicidals, and also the speed of action is not as quick. Therefore, if we already understand that the molecule we're using is not the strongest and the fastest, then we need to understand how the transfer properties of the wipe in terms of how much liquid we lay down on the surface will impact the kill efficacy of my product. So this kind of thinking holistically is what the Annex 1 wants you to be doing from now on to be prepared. We will move now, and I do apologize for jumping from one screen to the other one, but it's the best way to guarantee that the video does not block. So we will go now, for example, to the contact time. So your SOP has to be very clear for the operators to understand what is valid in terms of contact time. What should I be looking at in the surface to be a valid contact time? Is this, for example, the 4-minute slide valid as a part of the biocide action? Certainly not, because here probably more than 50% of the surface is dried. And that's what you need to be doing in a practical terms, verifying with a rationale what is the real time your surface remains wet in your facility with your ventilation, with the tools that you use to apply the liquid. Okay, so I'll go to the videos quickly. So I hope you're seeing right now the video demonstration. In this Lexan plate, we try to highlight how two different materials, a combination foam plus polyester on the right-hand side, and a standard polyester wipe, apply IPA in the surface. This is an unventilated room, but for the purpose of demonstrating the difference, we use the timer and visualize that this one is already drying up. And at some point, you should say this is not enough. You should put your rationale and some pictures in your SOP to justify what is acceptable and what's not. In the other hand, the combination wipe, due to the high absorptive properties of foam, plus the transmission properties of polyester, makes a very even and thick film of the IPA in the surface, guaranteeing a longest time of exposure. So remember that we mentioned that depending on the biocide or depending on the risk of the actual process you have, this can be a critical factor to think about. If you use, for example, hypochlorous or a bleach molecule that are fast-acting, especially hypochlorous acid, you may not require the same length of contact time that if you go, for example, with hydrogen peroxide 6% or glutaraldehyde molecules. This is easily seen in the level of liquid milliliters applied per surface in terms of different materials. So a non-woven material has a very, very low capacity of applying disinfectant or liquid to the surface. A polyester normally will have more than twice as much as the polyester cellulose, and a combination wipe, foam plus polyester, has a very large capacity. So when you want to do your critical operations, you want to make sure you achieve the contact time that is validated in your kill efficacy studies. Now we move into the hot topic of Annex 1, residues, and the facility appearance. So remember that the residues that just do look like this, white stains. Sometimes on the floor you will see stains that are even sticky and make a noise when you walk. All of those are signs that residues are creating a risk to your disinfection program, and also are sending the wrong message to the operators that being clean and being meticulous is not important. Just imagine you are manufacturing a vaccine and you're asked to have a very unnatural behavior, just like wiping in parallel ways, moving very slowly, etc., etc. And when your supervisor goes out of the door, you see this in front of you. It's the wrong message. So we need to be very careful of that. Let me just go to the video and we come back here. In this slide, we're using a stainless steel plate, and with a silicon carbide material, we create some particles just by abrasion. So these are stainless steel particles, and we simulate a multi-pass wiping. First pass of a polyester wipe, we take all of this contamination, is clearly visible. In the same area, we pass another clean wipe, and then we come with some extra contamination. And in the final one, you can probably see that it's nearly clean. We call it visibly clean in this case. So now in the last one, we're using a special microfiber that you can use to wipe down the same area. And we can clearly see that what we call on the third polyester wipe as clean still has a lot of contamination on it. So why does this happen? The reason for this to happen is the material itself. This is an analytical way to simulate what you just saw in the video, in which by using an HPLC analysis of the active substance in the wiper material itself, in the first pass in the surface, we recover so much material. Second pass, we only get to this level of recovery. And in the third pass, we claim it clean also from the analytical point of view. And on that same area, we use the microfiber, and we can see that we can pick up material that was sort of hidden to the polyester. The reason for that is the structure of the fiber itself, in which in microfiber has a lot of crevices that are capable to go into deeper into the imperfections of the material, but are also capable of picking up more material per fiber. Also, the size of the fibers themselves, as you can see, this is, for example, the size of a polyester fiber that is round, like in the first picture, and the microfiber that is star-shaped. A bundle of fibers occupy the same area that a single polyester fiber. So they are capable, just like a claw, they are capable of going to these imperfections of the material. So imagine, for example, you have vinyl curtains in any area in your facility, Class C area or some transfer areas. This is the look of vinyl in the microscope. And this kind of material will be able to come to these crevices or to the scratches in the stainless steel efficiently, but lead polyester is very unlikely not to be capable of doing that. So how important is that? If you go to your facility and you identify this kind of look in the glass windows, this kind of look to the stainless steel materials, or even what we call the chop effect on the floor, that when you walk, you get sticky. It's very well known, the story of a consultant that visited a facility in the north of Spain. And this facility was using glutaraldehyde for many years without applying a cleaning protocol to remove residues. So his shoe got stuck and he was walking and came off his foot. So that's how bad residues can come to. So don't wait until the surprises come to your place, and be proactive on addressing those residues. If we don't address the residues, the microorganisms can be sheltered by the residues and interfere with the molecules that act as biocides. That is very important, both for the biocide, but especially for the milder disinfectant that is applied on a daily basis. These are the looks of different molecules widely used as disinfectants. As we can see, all of them leave residues behind. Some less, some more, but at the end of the day, all biocides leave residues. Also, different manufacturers of the same molecule may use denaturing molecules, like, for example, in alcohol or stabilizers in nitrogen peroxide that interfere on the residue level. Now we will move to the second factor, that is third factor, comparing particle release from wipers. So I'll explain. We are going to be using a stainless steel grill, perforated one. And in one side, we will use a standard wipe, and the other one will use a special microfiber wipe. We use a commercially available USB microscope that I recommend that all of you to have in your facility, because it's very good to evaluate consumables. And we connect it to the laptop, and on the screen we can see the surface. What we're looking for is basically this type of contamination fibers, and please do not confuse it with these small white marks that are scratches of the surface of the Lexan under the UV light. So this is the surface. You see that there's some imperfections, both in the stainless steel and in the actual Lexan plate. Now we will do the wiping with a conventional material. This is an unwoven material, and as you can see, straightforward, out of the mechanical action, lots of fibers, a lot of particles are coming to the surface, creating a very high risk. So imagine when you're doing manual wiping down of some of the intricate surfaces in a filling machine or in an isolator. And in the other side, we will use the special microfiber wipe. There's some scratches are said, so please do not confuse them with particles coming from the wiper itself. And now we will pass simulating wiping of this area with the special microfiber. We can see clearly that there's a big difference between the two materials. And so imagine what is the impact for you in the process itself. We're using this black inspection wiper to wipe the two surfaces, and we will use afterwards the UV light to try to show you the particle. You can see in this one, there's a lot of white particles. Both fibers and particles, which at the end of the day are a vehicle for contamination to travel, and it may create a risk to the actual filling area. This is the microfiber area, and you can see that there's obviously, as we saw before with this USB microscope, much less particles in this side. Okay, so what is the impact? These are tests done in different types of materials. After wiping several times with different available polyester wipes, also same problem, not to the same extent. Polyester is obviously stronger than non-woven materials, and the microfiber ones are much stronger. So when you do your critical areas, make sure that if there's risk of abrasion or damage to the wiper, you need to use the right tools to avoid risk of particle or fiber contaminations. These are samples taken and analyzed through SMDX technology, taken directly from the gown of an operator in an ISO 5 area. And we can see here there's a lot of cellulose fibers that were coming from the wipers they used at that time, and also some other contaminants that they find and establish a root cause analysis for failure. We will go now to one of the last videos. Sorry, to the last video. And is, once we have selected the right tools, what is the impact of the operator's training and the operator's meticulosity to follow SOP? We use fluorescein here, and we try to apply nearly the same amount in the two sides, simulating a product spill in a filling machine. And on the left-hand side, we will be wiping down as if we did not have any training, or as if we were unconsciously in a hurry. This is a polyester wiper that we use as just the way we clean at home, doing circle cleaning. And in the other side, we use polyester wiper with the right wiping technique. So with this UV light, what we will show is how the surface look like. We use the IPA to highlight the color of the fluorescein, so it just brings more clarity to the UV. If you do this testing, it's very simple to do it in the laboratory. It's much more visible. It's very hard to film this and make it visible, but you can see straightforward the difference in the two images. So this kind of training is important for the operators. They need to see what the impact of their action is, and they need to understand the link between this kind of dirty surface and the risk of drug that may reach children, may reach grandparents, may reach family in terms of contamination. Okay, so I will move very quickly now into the contamination control strategy example. We use here the radar diagram, in which what we're trying to plot is the area. So we analyze all of these factors to try to show the holistic approach. A high number means a very robust process in that particular aspect, and a small number means a very weak process. I will only explain in detail the first one, and then you will be able to follow the details after the presentation, but I will concentrate on the summary. So we are analyzing 3 different lines that we operate, and in this particular wiping case, our worst case is line number 1, where we use non-woven polypropylene during process with IPA, presaturated, and on a weekly basis, we use hydrogen peroxide 6% using a non-woven polycellulose. So we saw that was a very risky practice due to the particle generation, but also due to the low volume of liquid we apply. In the other end, our more robust process, for example, we use the special microfiber wipe and IPA during process, and also we use a seal border polyester wipe presaturated with 6% hydrogen peroxide. So both are very safe wipes to be used. So we plot this in our graph and we see the first lines. So in this fashion, we analyze each one of the factors. So for example, if we identify that our line number 2, we're using a string mop commercial, we use it only 1. Sometimes the operator reuse it without any control, and we use a double bucket and a rinsing bucket. So that creates a lot of risk in terms of fibers, in terms of cross-contamination issues, and in terms of not being able to properly cover the floor. In the other end, in line number 3, we use a single-use microfiber and polyester combination mop. We use triple bucket, and we use the mop in a validated area with multiple passes, creating a robust process. We could even go higher using what is called a single-pass mop for the most critical areas. So in this same way, we start doing each one of the factors analyzed here, and we start creating our radar graph. Now, as said, I will jump quickly to the end of the graph. So imagine you have analyzed all of these aspects, including the transfer vectors. What is the impact of the materials I'm bringing in to the area? What is the impact of the wrapping that is used for the materials? Am I using contamination control measures such as tachymats in class C and D areas to avoid the ingress of spores into my classified areas? Do I use the proper disinfection techniques for the materials I transfer, either BHP, either Tyvek wrapping to avoid particle generation and to be able to wet the surface of the wrapping properly? Or am I using paper wrapping, which obviously if I use a lot of liquid will be perforated, and therefore operators don't spray properly when passing from class D to class C and class C to sterile area? Same with how effectively we can measure both EM data from a microbial point of view, but also from inspection of particles, so our background particle inspection and also visual inspection of our finished product. So it's not the same to have a human visual inspection of the product, especially if it's difficult to inspect like an emulsion, than to have a fully automated visual inspection. Samples that are clearly stated in warning letters from FDA and also in EMEA are, for example, the use of the improper and unvalidated gowning without establishing the life cycle, maybe not using a proper washing cycle and packaging of your critical garments. They are not packed in ISO 5 area, so you are creating a risk of particles, even though they may be sterile. And at the end, we come to have a graph that shows, for example, that line 3 is a much more robust process than our line 1. But also, it helps us analyze in combination factors such as we have a very weak way of understanding if our product is contaminated or not, or our background, and we identify that we have a mopping gap in our process. So when we decide where to start our proactive actions, we have a guideline here how we can get started improving our process and try to make it more robust. That is the aim of the Annex 1 approach. And as a final example, in the final 2 minutes, we use a reduced version of EMEA to analyze a risk from the impact to the patient health. How severe is the risk of particle contamination in a finished product? And how probable is the event to occur in a different scenario? So we grade high, medium, or low risk. And also bear in mind that the detectability is a factor we need to take into account. So we will compare freeze-dried products, syringes, clear vials, or opaque vials. We give a score of 1, 3, or 5, depending on low, medium, and high. And in this case, we analyze the special microfiber versus the non-woven material. And we can see that in terms of severity, it's obviously the same. The risk for the patients of particles is high, but it's very different how likely the event is to occur when we use a non-woven material compared to a more resistant wiper like special microfiber. And if we use automated inspection in a clear vial, it's fairly straightforward to detect the contamination. But what happens if it's not a clear vial and a liquid? Maybe it's an emulsion. Then the detectability becomes harder to pick, and our risk factor goes from 5 to 15 or even to 75 in the second case. And what if I go to a freeze-dried product? So in my worst case, my risk factor comes from 5 in the first one to 125. So sometimes we need to be sure that what is good in one line may not be the right tool for another line. So this kind of thinking is what the Annex 1 is asking you to think about. You see the level of exponential growth of risk by just changing the mind frame of the product itself and the risk for the patient. So at the end, as a summary, please keep in mind that you need to start addressing all of the risks that are shown in the bubble diagram in a proactive way, that obviously there's a lot of literature available on the web, but also through consultants and through vendors, and make yourself a work plan for the next 2 or 3 years to be implementing the measures in the way they are practical and affordable to guarantee that there's a business sustainability in long term. So if there's any questions, I'm here fully available to answer them for you. And thank you very much for the attention, and I hope the videos were clear.